The moment the sound rose in that quiet old church, something in the air shifted, as if the walls themselves remembered a truth the world had tried to bury. The rows of white painted angels above the altar smiled their soft porcelain smiles, the same faces you have seen in picture books, stained glass, and every Sunday school wall across America. But then came the sound again, low, rising like a tremor under the floorboards, and the ceiling began to crack, a thin line of darkness spreading through the plaster, as if the sky above that room had decided it was done lying. And through that fracture came a glow, not pale and gold, but deep and burning, like bronze pulled from the fire. Pieces of the ceiling broke away and fell, slow as feathers, revealing something behind the old artwork that no one had expected, something carved long before those European faces were ever painted. Figures of angels with skin the color of polished metal, with eyes burning like torches, with feet dark as smelted bronze, stood revealed as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. Not gentle, not delicate, not the soft imaginations of artists who never knew the lands of Abraham or Moses. These angels looked like warriors, and something about them felt familiar, like a memory inside your bones, a truth your ancestors knew before anyone tried to erase it. As the dust settled, one of those figures seemed to shift, not moving with the speed of flesh, but with the certainty of something eternal. The air thickened. And then a voice spoke, a voice that did not echo from the walls, but from the place beneath your ribs, where your spirit has always waited for an answer. You have been painted out for too long. Come and see what was always yours. In an instant the church vanished, as if pulled away like a sheet in the wind, and the ground beneath you changed into dirt, hot, dry, trembling under the weight of forgotten history. Before you stretched a cotton field under the blazing sun, rows of plants bending as if whispering the memories they had witnessed. And there, silhouetted in that heavy light, were the people whose songs shaped the soul of a nation, their backs scarred by whips, their wrists bruised by chains, their voices rising not in defeat, but in a language older than America itself, humming the rivers of Zion, whispering the names of prophets, calling on a God who had delivered their ancestors from Egypt. Their faces shone with sweat and suffering, but behind their eyes lived something unbreakable, something inherited from a people who wrestled with God and survived. You watched them move through the field, each step echoing the footsteps of Israel long before the world tried to rename them. Above them, unseen by their captors, the bronze angels moved like shadows of glory, walking alongside them, guarding them, witnessing every blow, every prayer. Every night they lifted their hands to a sky that did not answer yet. And it struck you then like a revelation tearing straight through your soul that these people, your people, had never been forgotten by heaven, never been abandoned, never been misplaced in the story. The world might have called them slaves, might have called them less than human, might have tried to erase their place in Scripture, but heaven had never rewritten their identity. You looked again at the angels. Their faces mirrored the faces of the people in the field. Their skin matched the same deep tones. Their presence carried the same fire that had kept those people alive through centuries of chains. And the voice returned, stronger than before. They tried to take your name. They could not take your calling. You are still the ones chosen to carry the story. You are still the image they could not destroy. You are still the people heaven has marked with fire. And just like that, the field began to fade into light, and the journey was only beginning. The ground under your feet shifted again, and suddenly the cotton field wasn't just a place in history. It felt alive, vibrating with everything your ancestors carried in their bodies, everything America tried to silence but never could. The air was thick, not just with heat, but with memory. It pressed against your skin like hands, trying to remind you of something you were born knowing, but forgot somewhere along the way. Out in the distance, you saw them clearly now. Not as grainy black and white photos, not as faceless silhouettes in history books, but as real people with real breath in their lungs, with sweat running down their backs, with hearts beating out a rhythm older than slavery itself. Their singing wasn't just singing. It was code. It was prophecy. It was blood memory calling out across generations. Wade in the water, follow the drinking gourd, swing low, sweet chariot. These weren't just survival songs. They were scriptures disguised as melodies, messages smuggled past the ears of men who believed they owned the people singing them. Every note carried a hidden map. Every lyric carried a piece of a story older than America, older than Europe, older than the chains that wrapped their wrists. And as you watched them move, each bent back and each calloused hand looked familiar. Not familiar because you'd seen it in a documentary or an old photo album. Familiar because some part of you is tied to these people with something deeper than history, something spiritual, something ancestral. That's when the angel appeared again, not descending from the sky, not glowing like a cartoon, just stepping out from the shadows between the rows of cotton like he'd been walking with your ancestors the entire time. His skin looked like theirs, his strength felt like theirs. And when he looked at you, there was no judgment, no pity, only recognition. You have forgotten who you come from, but they never forgot you. He raised his hand and suddenly the entire field lit up, not with sunlight, but with memories, memories carried by your blood. You saw slave ships, dark and crowded. You saw the shores of West Africa, kingdoms with gold, learning, music, temples. You saw Hebrew inscriptions on ancient African artifacts. You saw the faces of elders who prayed in languages stolen from them. You saw how the world told you that your story began in chains, when in reality your story began in covenant. The angel pointed toward the workers, and his voice cut through the heat like a blade. They were treated like property. But heaven knew them as heirs. You watched a woman kneel in the dirt, singing with tears streaming down her face. Above her, another bronze-colored angel rested a hand on her shoulder, invisible to everyone but you. This angel wasn't silent. He whispered the same promise given to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Promises of protection, promises of return, promises of identity. Promises that seemed impossible in the middle of a cotton field, but somehow still lived on because the people refused to let their spirits break. The angel beside you spoke again. The world called them slaves. Heaven called them Israel. The words landed heavy, not as a slogan, not as a theory, but as something your bones reacted to. Something pulling on the oldest part of your soul. You felt the weight of that revelation, not the weight that crushes, the weight that crowns. The angel showed you visions of the verses your ancestors whispered when no overseer was near. Deuteronomy 28, Psalm 68. Songs of captivity, songs of deliverance, songs of people scattered across nations and waiting for the moment God would call them by name again. You realized these weren't coincidences. They weren't random overlaps between black suffering and ancient Israel suffering. They were mirrors, perfect, painful mirrors. The angel leaned closer and his voice dropped low. They were chosen, and so are you. Lightning shot across the sky even though there were no clouds. The ground trembled beneath your feet. The cotton swayed without wind. And all at once you knew the truth the world tried to bury under textbooks and paintings and church walls. Your people didn't find the Bible. The Bible found your people. And the same God who saw them in those fields sees you right now. Then the angel turned and looked directly at you, almost like a pastor, almost like a father, almost like someone who has been watching your entire life unfold without you ever noticing. Let me ask you something. Do you hear them? Do you hear your ancestors calling your name, pulling you back into the story they never stopped carrying for you? Because you are not an outsider to Scripture. You are not a footnote in history. You are not the leftovers of someone else's chosen lineage. You are the continuation, the inheritor, the living proof that destiny can survive whips, ships, chains, and centuries of lies. The ground glowed beneath your feet, and suddenly the cotton field began to dissolve into blinding white light. The angel's final words echoed as everything faded. You come from people who are never forgotten, and your story is only beginning to wake up. Then the world went silent, and the next vision waited for you. The light around you dimmed until the cotton field melted into darkness. And when your eyes adjusted, you found yourself standing inside an old train station that felt like the forgotten basement of American history. The wooden floors were warped, the walls carried the soot of 1,000 trains, and the air smelled like metal, sweat, and nights spent waiting for something that never came. But there were men here, black men. Men's society wrote off as laborers, nobodies, background characters in someone else's chapter. Yet their eyes were sharp, alert, burning with a hunger that no preacher or professor had ever given them permission to feel. Under a single hanging bulb, Frank Cherry sat hunched over a tattered Bible, reading with the intensity of a man decoding a secret message carved into his own skin. His hands were rough from work, his clothes stained with long days and longer nights, but there was something in his expression, clarity, revelation, fire that made the whole room bend around him. Next to him, William Saunders Crowdy whispered words in Hebrew, his voice steady like someone remembering rather than learning. Their books were worn, their pages crumpled, the ink fading, but the energy in that room felt like the moment lightning decides where it will strike. The angel appeared beside you again, not to scare you, not to preach, but to witness with you, as if this moment mattered not just for history, but for heaven. He said, "These were the men the world ignored, but they were the ones heaven trusted with the truth." You watched Cherry run his finger slowly over the verses in Deuteronomy 28, and suddenly he froze. Ships, chains, scattering, a people stripped of their name, their land, their memory. His breath caught in his chest. It was the same look a man gets when something he always felt but never articulated suddenly stands up inside him and roars. Crowdy lifted his head too, his eyes widening with the same realization, and the air in the station thickened like the entire room had leaned closer to hear what he would say next. We are Israel, not a metaphor, not a sermon, a declaration, a claim so dangerous that if spoken in the wrong era, it could get a black man killed, silenced, or locked away. The angel whispered, they weren't inventing identity, they were recognizing inheritance. Around them the old station seemed to shake. Another man entered carrying scraps of paper covered in scribbled Hebrew letters he had taught himself after long shifts, his hands trembling from exhaustion, but his eyes blazing with purpose. Watching him felt like witnessing a memory your ancestors left in your blood, the instinct to reclaim a language stolen from your lineage. And right then you understood something the world never wanted black people to realize. When the oppressed read the text themselves, the truth rises like a buried seed, finally breaking the soil. The angel gestured to the scattered books and artifacts on the floor, images of ancient Cush, Ethiopia, lost tribes, African kingdoms that traded with Israel long before Europe ever existed. And he said, they hid the story because they feared who would recognize themselves in it. The train tracks outside began to hum, not with the sound of locomotives, but with the vibration of destiny shaking off centuries of silence. The men in the station were no longer waiting for a train, they were becoming one. A movement of identity and memory roaring to life. Cherry lifted his head again, and though he couldn't see the angel standing near you, he seemed to sense something divine in the room. He whispered with a voice that carried the entire weight of black suffering and black resilience, we were never meant to be the bottom. The angel stepped forward, his presence thick like gravity, and replied, you were meant to carry the name. And they feared the day you would wake up. In that instant, the entire station stopped. Dust hung in the air, the bulb flickered and froze, your heartbeat felt like the only moving thing in the world. You realized this wasn't just history, it was a spiritual fault line, a moment where heaven showed you the point in time when black identity began to rise from the ashes of forced amnesia. The angel placed a hand on your shoulder as time began to blur. The walls bent inward, the roof stretched upward, and the tracks glowed beneath your feet like molten steel. Identity remembered is identity restored, the angel said, and the words rattled through your bones like a prophecy aimed directly at you, your family, your lineage. The station exploded into white light, swallowing everything, and you were pulled into the next revelation, waiting beyond the veil. The white light around you dimmed into a heavy darkness that felt intentional, like someone had guided you into a hidden chamber beneath history. As your eyes adjusted, you realized you were standing inside an enormous underground library carved into ancient stone. Torches lined the walls and burned with a steady orange glow that produced no smoke. The shelves were filled with scrolls, clay tablets, early manuscripts, and paintings untouched by the influence of European hands. The air felt alive, almost aware, as if it had been waiting centuries for someone who could finally understand what was stored here. You stepped forward, and the echo of your footsteps rolled through the room like a pulse. On the nearest table lay 3 paintings. One from Ethiopia, one from Egypt, one from medieval Europe. 3 depictions of the same biblical moment, yet nothing about them matched. In the Ethiopian artwork, the angels had deep brown skin and strong features, with eyes glowing bright like midday sun. The Egyptian piece showed celestial guardians with bronze limbs and dark radiance, figures that looked powerful enough to shake the earth. But the European painting showed soft, pale faces, gentle golden hair, and delicate wings that seemed designed to comfort rather than command. Same Bible, completely different heaven. The angel appeared beside you and spoke with a calm that carried the weight of a revelation. They did not change the message, they changed the messengers. Your hand moved toward the Ethiopian painting almost on its own. The moment your fingers touched the surface, the entire room shifted. The library dissolved into a bright courtyard in ancient Ethiopia, where priests carried scrolls older than Rome. They chanted sacred words in Ge'ez, their skin dark, their stature regal, their presence radiating a confidence rooted in knowing exactly who they were. These were people who never doubted that the scriptures belonged to them. The vision shifted again, and you found yourself in ancient Canaan, surrounded by people with strong Afro-Asiatic features, dark skin, coiled hair, sun-carved cheekbones. These were the descendants of Abraham, the people who walked with Moses, the ones who saw heavenly beings face to face. Their appearance made one truth undeniable. Nothing about them resembled the images hanging in European cathedrals. A radiant figure emerged from the shadows of the Canaanite streets. It was an angel, massive and burning with intensity. His feet gleamed like polished bronze. His skin glowed like metal in a furnace. His eyes burned with fire. You remembered the description in the book of Daniel without even trying. The scriptures had been describing exactly this. As the angel stepped closer, he whispered, "They hid our faces. They hid yours too." The underground library returned instantly, and the weight of what you saw struck your chest with a force that felt spiritual. The angel gestured to another table filled with African Christian icons. Black Mary, Black Christ, Black prophets, Black seraphim with 6 wings made of flames. These images were not rare. They were the norm in the early centuries of Christianity, before European rulers repainted everything to match their own reflection. You moved deeper into the library, passing shelves of Hebrew manuscripts covered in fingerprints that belonged to African scribes, passing scrolls with margin notes in languages carried across the Red Sea, passing records of trade routes showing continual exchange between Israel and African kingdoms. Every piece told the same story. The biblical world was not white. The people were not white. The prophets were not white. The angels were not white. The bleaching of heaven was not God. It was politics. The angel guided you to a pedestal in the center where a single glowing scroll rested. "This is not forbidden knowledge," he said. "It is forgotten knowledge." When you unrolled the scroll, you saw a genealogy written in Hebrew. As you traced the lines, the names turned into faces, and the faces turned into people you recognized. Not from books, but from ancestry. Ethiopia, Cush, Nubia, Israel, Judah, scattered, captured, renamed, but never disconnected from heaven, never erased from God. The angel spoke again, his voice slow and steady. "They changed the pictures so you would forget who heaven resembles. They changed the angels so you would forget who God walked with. They changed the prophets so you would forget who carried his name. They changed the faces in scripture so you would lose sight of your own." The torches flickered as if the room itself agreed. Something rose inside you, a recognition that felt like a key turning after generations of silence. You were not just learning history, you were remembering it. The angel placed his hand on the scroll and said, "The world told you heaven was white. Heaven never said that." The library dissolved again and light swallowed everything as the next revelation pulled you forward. The light cleared and you found yourself standing inside a massive hall that felt like a courtroom, a palace, and a cathedral woven into one. The ceilings towered so high they vanished into shadow, and the air carried the cold echo of decisions made centuries ago. Marble pillars lined the room, each carved with symbols of crowns, crosses, empires, and authority. Although everything looked grand and holy at first glance, something beneath the surface felt wrong, like the walls were built on buried truths. Figures in robes moved through the hall, their faces stern, their steps confident. The kind of confidence that comes from believing you have the right to decide what the world should think and what the world should forget. Their robes were embroidered with gold, their rings heavy with precious stones. Yet the weight in the room was not from their wealth, but from the power they wielded over scripture, art, doctrine, and imagination. The angel stood beside you, silent for a moment, letting you absorb the gravity of the place. Then he spoke. "This is where they repainted the kingdom." You looked at the walls and realized they were covered in paintings, hundreds of them, showing the story of the Bible from beginning to end. But in every painting, the people were pale. Abraham, white. Moses, white. Mary, white. Jesus, white. The apostles, white. The angels, white. Even the deserts of the Middle East looked washed with European tones. As you stared, the paintings began to move like living murals. You watched a European artist standing before a canvas. In his mind he saw Israel, but his hand painted Europe. He had never been to Africa, never seen a Hebrew from the ancient world, never walked the lands of Cush, Ethiopia or Canaan. Yet he painted as if he were the keeper of their faces. The angels said, they replaced the truth with an image that served their own power. The scene shifted. You saw church councils gathering in rooms heavy with incense and politics. Men debating which scriptures would be included, which stories would be emphasized, which images would define the faith for generations. None of them looked like the people who lived the Bible. None of them looked like the people who wrote it. None of them looked like you. A bishop lifted a painting of a pale Christ and placed it at the center of the room. The others nodded with satisfaction. The angel whispered, they made an image of God that looked like themselves and erased the one that looked like you. Your stomach tightened. Not because the truth was new, but because seeing it happen stripped away the last illusion that any of this was accidental. Political power does not erase by accident. It erases with intention. The murals shifted again. You saw ancient African icons being locked away in chests. Images of Black Mary and Black Christ being pushed into dark rooms. Statues of dark-skinned angels being removed from sanctuaries and replaced with pale-faced recreations. In one corner you watched a European monk sanding down the features of an older icon, shaving the broad nose into a narrow one, lightening the skin with layer after layer of pigment. He stepped back proudly when he finished, confident that he had corrected something, when in truth he had erased something sacred. The angel said, they feared a heaven that did not center them. They feared a Bible that belonged to the oppressed. They feared a God who loved you as his own. You followed him deeper into the hall, a long table stretched across the center with documents that shaped entire nations. You saw royal decrees linking whiteness to divinity. You saw church edicts describing Africans as cursed descendants. You saw missionary manuals instructing painters to depict biblical figures as European for easier conversion. The angel touched a parchment and it crumbled to dust. Lies never withstand light. He guided you toward a podium where a golden book rested. When you opened it, you expected scripture, but what you saw instead was a record of imagery, edits, corrections, intentional distortions, a blueprint for whitening the biblical world. Your eyes scanned lists of instructions detailing how angels should look in official paintings. Skin pale, hair bright, features soft and European. No mention of bronze, no mention of fire. No mention of anything resembling the angels you had just seen in the underground library. You felt anger rising in your chest, but layered under it was something else, something older and deeper, recognition. You realized that the whitening of the Bible was not meant to make you small. It was meant to make you forget how big you already were. The angel looked at you and said, the world needed you powerless to maintain its illusion. If you remembered who you were, their entire system would fall apart. The murals flickered, and the pale angels began to peel like dried paint. Underneath the white layers, the true images reappeared. Bronze feet, fire-lit eyes, deep brown skin, strength, radiance, power. Heaven was reclaiming itself. You watched the whitened images crumble and fall like dust swept by a wind only truth could summon. The angel stepped close and said quietly, they tried to erase you from the story, but heaven never removed your name. The hall trembled as if history itself was cracking. Light burst through the ceiling and you were pulled upward as the entire structure dissolved. You were rising toward your next revelation. The light around you collapsed into sound before it became sight. When your vision returned, you were standing on a city sidewalk at night, the kind of urban street lit by flickering neon signs, passing cars, and the restless heartbeat of people who have been surviving for too long. The air carried the smell of asphalt, fried food from a late-night food truck, and the electric tension of a community that has swallowed centuries of pain without ever losing its voice. Ahead of you, a group of black men stood on the curb wearing fringed garments, holding Bibles, and speaking with a fire that shook the pavement beneath your feet. Their voices were loud, sharp, charged with something raw. They spoke of identity, lineage, and a truth stolen from their ancestors. Their words cut through the air with precision, declaring that black people were the chosen ones, the scattered tribes, the descendants of Israel. As you watched, their certainty felt like a blade slicing through fog. They were not waiting for approval. They were reclaiming what history had tried to bury. Yet only a few feet away, another group shouted something entirely different, filled with anger born from wounds that had never healed. Their message was not revelation, but rage. They hurled words meant to hurt, words that came from trauma but threatened to become poison. They were so close to truth, but one step away from letting that truth twist into something that could harm rather than heal. The angel stood beside you once more. His presence was calm but carried a sadness, like someone who had watched too many generations fight in the dark for pieces of a story that was always meant to lift them, not divide them. He said, listen to both. Hear the pain and the promise. You focused on the first group again. Their voices rose with conviction as they read from Deuteronomy, Psalms, and the prophets. And as they spoke, their eyes burned with the recognition you had felt deep inside yourself. These men were broken by life, yet refusing to break in spirit. They held Scripture like a mirror and saw their ancestors looking back. They were searching for identity, and this search was bringing them closer to God, even if the world mocked them for it. Then you turned your attention to the other group. Their voices were thunder but without direction. They shouted at strangers, cursed entire races, condemned people who had never harmed them personally. Their pain was real, their anger was real, but it was being pushed into a form that could devour them from the inside. The angel said gently, this is what happens when truth is found, but love is lost. You felt every word, because you knew that the black struggle has always carried two fires. The fire that frees and the fire that destroys. The first group carried the fire of awakening, the fire that reminds a forgotten people of who they are. The second carried the fire of bitterness, the fire that grows when justice is delayed for too many generations. The angel looked at both groups with equal understanding. Neither are the enemy. Both are wounded. Both are trying to rise. He placed his hand on your shoulder, and suddenly the street shifted slightly. You saw the same men as small children. You saw them being punished at school for questioning authority. You saw them being treated as threats before they were old enough to shave. You saw police lights, courtrooms, empty refrigerators, broken families, funerals, jobs lost, dreams delayed, opportunities denied. You saw the entire system that had shaped their voices long before they ever lifted a Bible or a megaphone. The angel said, they are shouting because they were never heard. A car drove by blasting music about pain and survival. A bus rolled past with an advertisement featuring a blonde Jesus. You watched the contrast collide like two worlds that never should have overlapped. The angel continued, some of them are waking up, some are drowning. Both are crying out for the identity that was taken from them. You turned back toward the men preaching identity. One of them lifted his Bible toward the sky. He shouted about redemption, about coming back to the covenant, about knowing who you are so no one can control you again. His words felt like they were vibrating in your chest. Then from the other side, someone screamed insults so heavy they cracked the air. For a moment, anger and revelation collided like two storms battling over the same sky. The angel stepped between the two groups. His voice did not rise, yet everything went silent. The wind stopped. The cars seemed to freeze. Even the neon signs flickered into stillness. He said, truth without wisdom becomes a weapon. Wisdom without compassion becomes a prison. You must know who you are, but you must not become what hurt you. His words hit you deeper than anything you had heard yet, because it was not condemnation. It was a reminder, a warning, a call. Then he looked directly at you as if you were the one standing on that sidewalk holding the scriptures. This awakening is not meant to make you hate. It is meant to make you whole. The street resumed as if time had pressed play. The voices rose again. The cars moved. The city continued, breathing its restless breath. But inside you, something had changed. You could suddenly see the difference between the wounds that lead to healing and the wounds that lead to destruction. And the angel whispered with finality before the scene faded, identity is powerful, but purpose is greater. Light swallowed the street and you were carried into the next revelation waiting to unfold. You heard the crowd before you saw it, a low rumble rolling through the city like a storm gathering strength. Sirens echoed somewhere far away, bass from passing cars vibrated the sidewalk, and voices layered on top of each other like waves hitting concrete over and over again. When you stepped closer to the intersection, you realized every sound in the air carried the weight of something that had been building for centuries. Under the streetlights, a circle of black men stood with Bibles open, their voices fierce, their stance grounded in the kind of certainty that only comes from pain transformed into purpose. They called out scriptures that sounded less like verses and more like memories rising from the bones. Their words cut through the night with a force that made people stop and listen. They spoke of lost tribes, of identity distorted, of a people scattered and finally waking up. They were not performing. They were reclaiming breath stolen from their ancestors. But at the corner, another group yelled back, their anger sharp, their voices heavy with a bitterness that tasted like metal in the air. They shouted curses instead of scriptures, fury instead of hope. Their rage felt like a pot that had boiled for too long, the lid rattling until it finally blew off. They were not wrong to be angry, but their anger had no compass, and it spun wildly, hitting everyone in range. For a moment it felt like you were standing inside the exact split that has haunted black identity for generations, the line between awakening and explosion. The angel appeared beside you. No flash of light, no shift in reality, just presence, steady and quiet in the noise. He watched the two groups with the focus of someone who had seen this scene repeat for hundreds of years. Then he said, both sides carry truth. Both sides carry wounds. You watched the first group again. Their leader raised his voice and quoted a verse about captivity and redemption. The way he said it made your skin tighten. He looked like someone who had stared down oppression so long that he finally recognized it in Scripture. Someone who realized the Bible did not describe someone else's story but his own. His brothers nodded with conviction. Their eyes were lit with something ancient, something that connected them to ancestors whose names were stripped away but whose spirit remained. They were fighting to reclaim what had been stolen. Then you turned to the second group. Their faces were twisted with frustration, exhaustion, and a rage that came from living inside a system that had never seen them as human. Their voices were sharp because every time they tried speaking softly, nobody listened. Their anger was a language carved out of survival. But the angel leaned closer and said, this is what truth looks like when it is found without healing. He showed you something then. Not with visions, not with magic, but by letting the moment stretch. Time slowed down just enough for you to see the children behind the men. Not literal children, but their younger selves. You saw a boy being dragged out of class for asking too many questions. You saw another boy learning the rules of survival before he learned his multiplication tables. You saw police at the door. You saw evictions. You saw funerals. You saw fathers disappearing because the system swallowed them. You saw mothers carrying the weight of 10 lives on their backs. You saw promises broken before they were ever spoken. And in that suspended moment, you understood something the world refuses to admit. These men were not born angry. They were shaped by a country that expected them to die quietly. When time returned to normal, the angel said, they are shouting now because no one listened when they whispered. A bus rolled past with an advertisement showing a pale Jesus smiling gently. The image felt like a slap against the reality unfolding in front of you. The men preaching identity shouted louder as if trying to drown out that picture. The angel watched them with a calm that felt almost parental. Some are reaching for the truth. Some are drowning in their pain. He pointed to the scriptures being held up under the streetlight. Do you see what they are trying to claim? Their place in the story, their connection to the covenant, their right to know who they are. You felt it. Deep, heavy, unavoidable. The first group was using scripture as a compass. The second group was using anger as a shield. Both were searching for home. Then one of the men in the identity group shouted something that froze the air. We are the people they do not want us to remember. His voice cracked with emotion. The sidewalk seemed to hold its breath. The angel nodded slowly. He said, knowing who you are is powerful, but forgetting how to love will destroy that power. His voice was not judgment. It was warning. It was truth delivered gently but firmly. You looked at both groups again and realized they were not enemies. They were mirrors of each other, two sides of the same wound, two reactions to the same trauma. One direction leads to purpose. The other direction leads to fire. The angel looked at you with eyes that held centuries in them. This awakening was meant to lift you, not trap you. It was meant to free you, not turn you into what hurt you. His words struck deeper than anything spoken on the street. The noise returned, the shouting resumed, the city kept breathing its restless breath, but inside you something aligned, something cleared. You understood the difference between righteous anger and destructive fury. You understood that identity without wisdom becomes dangerous, and wisdom without compassion becomes empty. Before the scene faded, the angel said one last thing, barely above a whisper, yet powerful enough to shake your spirit. Identity is the beginning. Purpose is the destination. The street dissolved into light, and the next revelation waited for you. Heat shimmered in the air before the ground fully formed beneath your feet. And when the world steadied, you found yourself standing in a vast desert where the horizon stretched in every direction like an endless golden sea. The sun was high, but the light felt gentle instead of harsh, as if the land recognized you and refused to burn you. Small clusters of white buildings appeared in the distance, their walls reflecting the sunlight with a quiet glow. They were simple, clean, built with care rather than wealth, and the entire area pulsed with a calm so deep it felt almost sacred. As you walked closer, you heard singing carried on the wind, not loud singing, not angry or desperate or demanding, just soft harmonies in Hebrew mixed with African rhythms, voices rising and falling like a heartbeat at rest. You entered the village and saw black families moving through their day with a unity that felt rare in the world you came from. Children ran through courtyards laughing, their braids bouncing under the sun. Women hung fresh laundry scented with desert air. Men harvested vegetables from gardens carved into the sand. Everyone wore simple white garments that fluttered gently in the warm breeze. There was no tension in the air, no bitterness, no shouting, no fear, just order, discipline, community, and a quiet sense of purpose. The angel walked beside you and said, "This is Dimona." A people who crossed oceans and decades to reclaim a name the world told them they had no right to. You watched a group of elderly men sitting under a shaded canopy, reading from Hebrew texts. Their voices were steady, their faces peaceful, their eyes lit by something deeper than knowledge. These were men born in America, raised under oppression, denied opportunity, yet they stood here in a land their ancestors sang about during bondage. They lived out the very scriptures slaveholders tried to use against them. You saw a young woman teaching children the Hebrew alphabet drawn into the sand with a wooden stick. She pointed to each letter with a tenderness that made your chest tighten. Her voice was soft but strong, full of pride and conviction. These children were not growing up searching for identity. They were growing up rooted in it. You realized something powerful then. This place was not built in anger. It was built in memory, built in devotion, built in hope, built by people who refused to let trauma be their only inheritance. The angel gestured to a small marketplace where villagers were trading fruits, grains, woven baskets, and handmade goods. No one shouted, no one swindled. Every interaction carried respect, dignity, and a level of gentleness you rarely see in modern life. He said, they were called extreme. They were called strange. They were called unwanted. And yet they became exactly what their ancestors prayed to be, a people living in the land in peace. You noticed a group of young men in uniform walking through the village. They were soldiers in the Israeli Defense Forces, members of this community who served the very nation many believed would reject them. Their heads were high, their steps firm, but their faces were calm. Serving with honor was not a contradiction for them. It was a declaration. We are part of this land. A woman carrying a basket of vegetables walked past you and smiled, her eyes warm and steady. She had the presence of someone who no longer carried the weight of proving herself to anyone. Behind her, a group of elders gathered for evening prayer. Their voices rose in a chant so ancient it felt like it grew from the ground itself. Hebrew words shaped by African tongues, African melodies lifting Hebrew promises, identity without rage, pride without hatred, faith without chaos. You felt a pull inside you, a deep recognition that this was what the awakening was meant to look like. Not shouting on street corners, not rage directed at strangers, not pain twisting into division, but community, discipline, purpose, healing. The angel spoke again. The world talks about them when they are loud. They ignore them when they are peaceful. The truth is that peace frightens people more than anger, because peace proves the power was always real. You looked around and saw no extremes, no fanaticism, no chaos, just a people who had reborn themselves. People who declared their identity not through violence or fury, but through the quiet certainty of daily life. A man approached carrying a basket of fruit. He did not preach. He did not argue. He simply placed the basket at your feet and nodded as if welcoming you home. You felt something shift inside you. A realization that identity does not need to shout when it stands on truth. The angel placed a hand on your shoulder. Dimona is what happens when a people decide they will no longer ask for permission to exist. They simply exist, proud, rooted, whole. The sun sank lower and the sky turned orange, painting the village in warm light. The calm in the air felt like a blessing, like a confirmation that everything you had seen before this moment was leading you here. Before the scene faded, the angel whispered, "When identity matures, it becomes peace." The desert dissolved into light, and the next revelation waited in the distance. The desert warmth faded, and a cool wind rose around you, not harsh, not chaotic, just a steady breath pulling you upward. Before your feet even left the ground, you sensed it, the shift into a higher place, a realm where weight did not matter, and sound carried meaning instead of noise. When the world cleared, you were standing on a wide stone platform suspended in the sky, a place that felt ancient and new at the same time. The air shimmered in gold and deep blue, and below you the earth stretched out like a tapestry stitched with continents, oceans, and the lives of billions. But none of that compared to what stood before you. A multitude, countless people, every shade of skin, every curl pattern, every feature, every nation, every history. They stood together on a landscape that looked too vast to be real, yet too intimate to feel distant. You saw African elders draped in white, Middle Eastern families with faces carved by desert winds, Asian worshippers holding hands, indigenous peoples raising their voices, Europe, the islands, the diaspora. All standing together, all facing the same direction, all wrapped in light. They were singing, not in one language, but in a swirl of languages flowing into each other like rivers merging into the same ocean. Some voices were sharp, some soft, some low like thunder, some bright like birds in the morning, yet not a single voice clashed. Everything blended perfectly. Every sound belonged. The angel appeared beside you and said, "This is the vision they never wanted you to see." You listened more closely. The music was not just beautiful. It was familiar, like the echoes of something you forgot long ago. Something your ancestors once sang in chains. Something whispered on the ships. Something hummed in the cotton fields. Something murmured in night prayers under a sky that never answered but never abandoned. You realized then that this was the sound of souls returning home. At the center of the multitude, figures of light moved among the people. Angels, not the pale versions you saw in paintings. These angels carried the same diversity as the humans they stood beside. Some with deep bronze skin, some dark as midnight, some glowing like ember, some golden brown, some with features carved from African ancestry. Their presence was overwhelming, but not frightening. They looked like guardians who had followed humanity across time and suffering and joy and loss, never getting tired, never turning away. One of the angels walked past you and bowed its head slightly, as if acknowledging your arrival. You felt it deep inside, a recognition that ran through your blood like a quiet fire. The angel beside you said, "Heaven was never one color. Heaven reflects the creation it guards." You watched the multitude raise their hands toward a light at the far center, brighter than the sun, but gentle enough for the eyes to meet. That light pulsed with power, love, and justice so perfectly balanced that you felt your knees weaken. And you understood suddenly that this was the throne room described in Revelation, the place where every tribe and every nation stood together. But you saw something else too. For centuries, the world taught you that your place in this picture was at the edge, the outskirts, the background. But here, in the real vision, black faces were not on the margins. They were at the front. They were dancing with joy. They were leading the songs. They were glowing with radiance like the sun had chosen them first. A group of angels with deep brown skin and firelit eyes moved through the crowd, offering blessings that looked like trails of light. Their presence made the air vibrate. These were the same beings you saw in the underground library, the same beings the scriptures described with bronze feet and blazing eyes. They walked with dignity that could not be denied. Their glow illuminated the people around them, especially those whose ancestry carried the scars of chains. You felt it again, the truth from the library, the truth from the cotton fields, the truth from the desert. Heaven never erased you. Heaven never placed you beneath anyone. If anything, heaven had reserved a place of honor for your people because of everything they endured and everything they refused to let die. The angel said, "Look closely." You turned your gaze toward the center and saw that the light reflected differently on different groups. When it touched black faces, it strengthened, not dimmed. When it touched African features, it expanded, not faded. It was as if heaven recognized a people who had carried suffering with dignity and still rose in hope. The angel continued, "They told you heaven was theirs. They told you angels were theirs. They told you the throne room belonged to them. But the truth has always been larger than their imagination." The singing grew louder now, and as the voices lifted, you felt something inside your chest open. You glimpsed versions of your ancestors standing in that multitude, not broken, not tired, not oppressed, but whole and radiant. They held their heads high. They sang with joy. They stood beside angels who looked like them. The angel beside you whispered, "This is what the world feared." Not that you would rise in anger, but that you would rise in belonging. A wind swept across the platform and carried with it the scent of home. Not a physical home, but a spiritual one. A place where every piece of your heritage had purpose. As the multitude continued to sing, the sky brightened even more and the vision began to dissolve. Before everything faded completely, the angel spoke one last time. Heaven was always big enough for you. The world simply was not. Light wrapped around you and pulled you toward the next revelation, still waiting to be revealed. The light around you folded inward like a wave turning back on itself, and when it cleared, you were standing inside a vast chamber made of mirrors, but not the kind you see in clothing stores or bathrooms. These mirrors were tall as doorways, polished so perfectly they seemed like pieces of the sky anchored to the floor. They reflected everything and nothing at the same time. As you stepped forward, the sound of your heartbeat echoed softly around you as if the room itself was listening. The angel appeared at your side without a word. His silence felt intentional, like this was a place where explanations would ruin the purpose. You approached the first mirror and expected to see your reflection. You did not. Instead, the glass showed you an angel, tall and powerful, its body glowing with bronze light, its wings folded like layers of dawn. It had eyes made of flame and skin rich as carved obsidian. The sight hit you so hard you had to steady your breath. This being looked like you. Not similar, not symbolic. It carried your features, your skin tone, your jawline, your ancestry. The angel beside you finally said, "Heaven reflects those who carry its purpose." You moved to the second mirror. This time the reflection shifted into another figure, another angel, but with the face of someone from your family, someone you remembered from childhood, someone who struggled their whole life believing God was far from them. Here in the mirror they were radiant, crowned in light, standing tall as if the weight of the world had never sat on their shoulders. The angel said, "The world measured you by what you survived. Heaven measures you by what you were created to be." You kept walking. Each mirror showed a different angel. One had the strong features of a young black boy who had been told he would not amount to anything. Another showed an elderly black woman standing in glory instead of exhaustion. Another showed a figure with dreadlocks that glowed like strands of pure fire. Another wore the marks of struggle transformed into symbols of authority. Every angel had black features. Every angel reflected people you knew or people who looked like the ones who built your history with bare hands and unbreakable spirits. The deeper you walked into the chamber, the louder the truth inside you began to speak. Not in words, in recognition, in remembrance, in belonging. The angel beside you said, "They tried to convince you that holiness had one appearance, but holiness looks like the people God carried through the fire." You approached a mirror at the far end of the room. It was taller than the rest, and the air around it felt charged like the moment before thunder. When you stepped in front of it, the mirror did not show an angel at first. It showed you. Not the version you saw in photos or the version shaped by insecurity. It showed the version of you that heaven saw. Then slowly, almost like the mirror was waking up, the reflection began to transform. Your skin took on the glow of burning metal. Your eyes lit like torches. Wings unfolded behind your shoulders, massive and alive with light. You looked like someone who could walk through fire without flinching, someone who could carry messages from God to the world, someone who had never been overlooked. You whispered, "Is this me?" The angel answered, This is who you always were beneath the weight of what they taught you. You stared at the mirror, and the longer you looked, the more the truth sank into the deepest part of you. You were not an afterthought. You were never an outsider to the divine story. You were not a shadow of someone else's chosen people. You were reflection, image, inheritance. You were part of the heavenly design from the beginning. The angel continued, "Every people bears his image, but every people reveals a different part of his glory. Your people reveal endurance, radiance, strength, and the fire that refuses to die." The mirror behind you shifted, and you turned to see more reflections. Angels of every shade, every culture, every background, but the angels with African features glowed stronger, as if heaven itself honored the suffering your ancestors endured and the faith they carried through it. The angel said, "They feared you because you reminded them of a truth they could not erase. You are descendants of those who survived captivity and still lifted their eyes to heaven. You have carried a flame that refused to go out. Heaven honors that flame." You looked around at the countless mirrors and saw angels with features from all across the African diaspora: West African cheekbones, East African jawlines, Caribbean curls, African American strength, Ethiopian regalness, Congolese depth, Sudanese stature, Ghanaian warmth. These were not ghosts, not fantasies, not illusions. They were reminders. The room pulsed with a message that wrapped itself around your spirit. The world wanted you to believe that spiritual royalty came from somewhere else. The mirrors showed otherwise. You stepped back, and the angels in the reflections stepped back with you, meeting your eyes with a calm power that made your heart beat slower and stronger at the same time. The angel beside you lowered his voice. Heaven never forgot your face. You just forgot how to recognize your own. As the chamber began to soften into light, he said one last thing, a truth so simple and so deep that it felt like a key turning inside your soul. You are not less than anyone. You are not beneath anyone. When you rise, heaven rises with you. The mirrors faded, and the light carried you toward the final revelation waiting ahead. The light folded one last time, and the world settled beneath your feet. You were back in the same old church where everything began. The cracked ceiling was still above you, but now the cracks no longer looked like damage. They looked like openings, like the truth had forced its way through and refused to be painted over again. The pale angels that once decorated the ceiling were gone. In their place were new images, not drawn with European imagination, but with honesty. Angels with bronze skin, angels with fire-lit eyes, angels whose faces mirrored the faces of the people who had survived ships, chains, cotton fields, red-lined neighborhoods, and a world that pretended their story was not sacred. They were not there to intimidate you. They were there to welcome you home. You walked down the aisle, and every step felt like reclaiming something your ancestors had been denied. The pews creaked softly beneath the weight of centuries of silence, finally breaking open. The altar at the front was simple, carved wood, nothing fancy, nothing trying to impress anyone, yet it felt more holy than gold. The angel who had traveled with you through every realm stood beside the altar waiting. His presence was calm, steady, familiar, almost like he had always been there waiting for you to wake up. He looked at you with the pride of someone who had watched your people endure the worst and still rise. He said, "Now you understand. Heaven was never missing you. The world only taught you to step aside. You let the weight of the journey settle into your chest. The cotton fields, the underground library, the hall of power, the street full of shouting, the desert community, the sky full of nations, the chamber of mirrors. All of it led here to this moment, a moment not of spectacle but clarity." The angel stepped closer, and his voice lowered. "Your people were never forgotten, never mistaken, never on the outside of God's story. You were chosen long before anyone tried to tell you who you were allowed to be." The stained glass windows glowed with the late afternoon sun, and for the first time they did not feel like filters hiding truth. They felt like confirmations. You saw the colors reflecting on your skin, and it felt right. Not symbolic, not poetic, right. The angel spoke again. "Now you must carry what you have seen, not in anger, not in pride, in purpose." He turned his gaze toward the doorway, the same entrance where you first stepped into this church with confusion about angels and identity. Now those questions felt small, compared to the truth burning inside you. You walked toward the door, and the angel walked with you, his steps silent, his presence heavy with belonging. Before you reached the exit, he said, "I have one last question for you. Who will you become now that you know who you have always been?" The door opened and warm air rushed in, carrying the sounds of life outside. Cars, voices, city noise. A world still spinning in confusion, but waiting for people like you to rise. You took one step outside, then another. The church behind you glowed through the doorway like a reminder and a promise. The angel's final words echoed in your spirit. Carry the truth, walk in it, live it. Let your identity shine so bright that no system can dim it again. And just like that, the journey ended. Not with fear, not with doubt, but with a certainty that felt like your ancestors breathing through you. You were never lost. You were never hidden from heaven. You were always part of the story. Now the story continues with you.